And since 2011, he's now professor at ITW2017. There were numerous awards, I'm not going to list them all, I just mentioned a few. So he had PRC grants, he had the NSF Career Award, 2013 Comstock and IT Soc Joint Paper Awards, and he was IT Soc Distinct Lecturer from 2009 to 2011. So I'm very much looking forward to his presentation on caching, and let's welcome Michael Gastpar.
Good morning, and let me start by thanking the organizers for this kind invitation and honor and pleasure mostly to talk a little bit about some stuff that we've done about caching, opening up this day, which, if I read the program correctly, has a special focus on media, content delivery, and caching. So I guess that's the first installment of that. Let me ask one thing, should I use the microphone? Yeah, better, okay, good. Because I didn't really do enough physical exercise. I don't know whether I'll manage to do it for 60 minutes, we'll see. Then the next thing I guess I should say is this all joint work with a string of postdocs and PhD students at EPFL, Sang-Moon Ding, Gilopetfeld, Zaitare, and maybe most fittingly for here, Jimmy Wang, who got his master's at NTU here, was amazingly trained, came to EPFL, and I think did very, very nice work. So I'm very happy to talk about his work here in Taiwan. It's a special pleasure. So what I decided to do for the talk is to go with a very old school or canonical layout, single user then multi-user, like we were doing information theory. And not only that, I also decided to split the single user into lossless and lossy. That's maybe even more classical information theory. For the multi-user caching, I'll talk first about something that looks a bit odd, perhaps worst case and so on, but of course all of you here, I'm sure, are somewhat familiar with what people have done in caching. That's where most of the work is. I was tempted to give you somewhat of an overview of that, but gave up pretty quickly. I'll have a list of references. All the wonderful work was just too much. I cannot possibly do justice. So it will be a more egocentric thing. I'll show you what I have actually thought about myself, which mostly I'll refer to as a canonical information theoretic model. I'll show you right away what I mean by that. So what's caching? The way to think about it is, in some situations, or envision a world, right, where that would be true, that storage is cheap and the price of bandwidth varies over time or space, right? Sometimes it's expensive, sometimes it's cheap. And then the caching paradigm is very simply, whenever it's cheap, whenever bandwidth is cheap, send something, right? Send something because storage is cheap. So whatever something you send can be stored at least. And I guess here's the catch. You have to do that in general without actually knowing what will be requested by the user or the users. And so you have to keep your fingers crossed and hope that what you actually send will be useful, right? So can you do that? Of course you can, otherwise I wouldn't be here talking about it. And I want to first very briefly show you at a very high level a few of these coding opportunities. The first one is very, very dumb. It just serves as to pitch the main kind of way of measuring performance. This is if you have this kind of side information about how likely it is that a user would like a certain file. So this is one way of thinking about it. You have a database of a bunch of files, and the user will request one of them. You have such a probability here, then of course, a natural caching strategy is just to cache at least what is more likely to be requested, right? But here's what I really have in mind with this. So what I'll use throughout the talk is these kinds of figures. On the horizontal axis is the cache rate or the cache size or the amount of memory you're willing to dispense with at the user terminal. And on the vertical axis is whatever you have to deliver at the end of the day, right? The update rate, what you do in the hot phase, what you do when bandwidth is supposedly more expensive. And what you can see, of course, is two down strategies. The red point is you don't do any caching, you don't use any of the cache. You wait for the request to come in, then you just have to send a file. That will cost you, informally speaking, the file entropy, right? That's how many bits you'll have to send. The other down point is the blue point. And that's where you choose not to send anything during the hot phase. You do everything in the cheap phase, you fill up that cache if you have enough of it. So how much do we need? Well, then you need to store all the files, and I'll use the letter capital N to denote the number of files in SQL at the top as well. So you need n times the file entropy, right? You can get any point on the straight line connecting these. For example, the midpoint for each file, you cache half of it, right? Then you need n over 2 times the file entropy of cache, and then when the request comes in, you'll send the second half of just the requested file. Now, of course, you can do a little better than this line if you have this additional side information about probabilities. In particular, for example, take this empty bullet there, right? That is when you cache the one file that is most likely to be requested. In that case, and that's maybe another element of the way I will measure performance, the average, on average, how many hot bits do you expect to deliver, right? Well, if it's the most likely file that is actually being requested, then you don't have to send anything. In all other cases, you'll have to send the full thing. So that gives you 1 minus the max probability times the file entropy. And then again, you can do it. You can of course do a little better on the right there, and I will consider that one. A completely different caching also. There's more, right? So if that was all, there would not be much to talk about. A completely different caching opportunity, and perhaps more obvious for information theorists, I don't know, is if you have commonalities, if you have somehow similarities in the file. And the very extreme case of that is if we think of the files as 2 halves, right? The first file is A comma B, the first half is A, and you can see that shows up in the second file again, which is A comma C. So these 2 files have the very special property that the first half is identical and the second half is arbitrary. Clearly, it's very tempting to cache just the first half at that point, right? Because no matter what, you'll need that anyway. And then, so that's the blue. Blue will usually be for the caching and red for the hot phase, the delivery, right? For the delivery phase, you'll have to send B or C depending on the request. That will cost you half a file of cache, right? And then in the update phase, you need to send another half. That's an optimal operating point that you can verify easily. Now, of course, files are not in general of this very simple kind. Certainly not for information theorists. A more natural model, at least coming from your first information theory class, would be this. You have long files, x1 and x2, so these are the 2 files now. Each letter is from an alphabet of case symbols, and then they're jointly IID over time, right? That's a classical information theory assumption. And here's the catch per letter equal with probability p. Otherwise, let's say uniform. It could be something else, but the catch is of course that it's probability p that they're equal. And then what can you do, right? Again, you'd be tempted to say, well, you somehow have to store the common thing, the common part, right? But what common? What is the common thing? And here's a sneak preview of something that I'll show you in more detail later on. What you'll have to do is actually, it's Weiner's common information, for those of you who have seen it. I'll, of course, define it later on. That's what you'll cache. And then in the hot phase, you'll just have to somehow top it off to the requested file. And so the cache size will be Weiner's common information. And this will turn out to be also an optimal operating point. So in a sense, that is exactly the extension from this simplistic model. Now, another caching opportunity, and perhaps the most fascinating one, shows up if you have more than one receiver, right? More than one decoder, more than one customer. And here is the simplest picture. You have 2 decoders, and this is the setup that has been studied in most of this wonderful work that's out there. Namely, you have 2 separate cache messages. You can configure one cache message for customer 1, another one for customer 2, and here's the catch in a certain sense. There's one single update message. You pay only once, so to speak, which is automatically received at both of these customers. And then there's a wonderful coding strategy. So to understand that one, we'll again think of the files as split into halves. Like file 1 is B1, B2. File 2 is C1, C2. And the code due to Madali and Neeson will do something like this. For example, just a quick example. Cache a modulo sum of the first halves of the files at user 1. Right? Cache a modulo sum of the second halves of the files at user 2. And then this little miracle happens that, for example, if user 1 now wants the first file and user 2 wants the second file, for B and C, then the update B2, C1 is sufficient. And just to make sure that most of you have seen this too many times, but look, user 1 has already B1 plus C1. It gets C1 in the hot phase, so it can cancel C1 from here. We'll get B1, the first half of the desired file. The second half it gets for free, it gets explicitly here, right? Same thing for user 2. User 2 on file C, it already has, oops, that was the wrong button. It already has, it wants C, it gets C1 for free, and then C2, it can unlock it from here by using the B2 as a key, so to speak, okay? So for a cache size of a half a file per user, right, we're sending just a half a file, because it's a model size, you need an update rate of 1 file total. This is again an optimal operating point, right? And now, of course, what you should say is, well, let's combine the two coding opportunities, the one that says you have file simulators and the one that says you have multiple users. So let's do the same thing, except that you can see now why I call the files B and C, because A is going to be again the common part. I'm going to start off with this very simplistic model, right? You have A1, A2, so I now have to use quarter files, right? A1 is the first quarter of the first file and so on. But you can again see the first half of the two files is identical. And you should say, I hope you're all going to agree that, of course, we'll again just cache A1, A2 at both users, right? Because they want that anyway, right? What could the harm be? We cache A1 and A2 at both users, and then, well, you can figure out easily what the update is, right? So we need a cache size of half a file per user, right? And in the update, we'll need 1 file total, at least in the worst case, meaning that in the case where they want different files of 2 users. And the challenge, right, is can you do better? Now, if you know the answer, don't blurt it out yet. This is supposed to be for those who get totally bored in the next part. I'll resolve this, of course. I'll tell you the answer, but can you do better than this or not? So that's okay, good. With this, I'll get to the more formal part. So when we got to this problem, we thought, like, what would a student of information theory coming after Stefan Moser mentioned Jay Massey's wonderful class. What would a student coming out of that class do about the caching problem? And perhaps my meta message here is for those of you who are teaching a class on information theory. I think this is actually a wonderful homework problem or exam problem. If somebody's taking the information theory class, they don't listen to the answers. So this is where you would start, right? You have data, you have 2 encoders, the cache encoder and the update encoder, so like probably draw a block diagram like that, and 1 decoder. And there's going to be a cache message, and then there's going to be a request, which maybe you draw like that. It comes from the decoder, but perhaps better as a side information model, the request comes in from the side. Now, how to model these? Well, the data is clear, right? That's just x to the k, a long string, right? K will become large. That's everybody will certainly agree. Then cache message has a certain rate, right? Normalized by k, that's k times RC, that's the number of bits you will cache. And then the update message also has a bunch of bits, k times RU. So RC will be the cache rate, RU the update rate. And the remaining question is, how about the request? Right? How do you model the request? My claim is, in the first place, you'll just model it like that, right? You'll also put a string of the same length of something else. Let's just call it y to the k, right? That's the general version of the request. And then what you want to recover is some function that involves the data and the request. And again, in economical information theory, where you'll just do that on a per letter basis and then extend it all the way to k, right? So that would be perhaps what you would have done, I don't know. And I'll refer to this as a canonical information theoretic model. And I should also point out, the joint distribution of x and y here is totally arbitrary, right? Like in classical information theoretic problems of this type. Now, perhaps you disagree. You say, no, it should be different. So here's another solution you could have ended up with. Namely, for the request, you think again and you say, like, no, I just want a finite number of requests, right? Maybe 2. Maybe there are only 2 requests. I here put capital N. That's again, remember, capital N was the number of files in the database, so that would be order me one of the files of the database. And now what you request is, so a function of x to the k, right, that's the long data string, comma y, which tells you which long string you would want. So x, every element of x would now be a vector of length n, and in the time direction you have the length of the file. So actually, you can replace at that point, of course, the data by only those things that will ever be requested, which are these n functions of the data. And I think I'll just call them in the rest of the talk like this. A bold X, this means it's a really long file, and then the file number will be this exponent, if you wish, in parentheses. So you have n files, and you request one of them. That's just rewrite in the notation. I'll refer to this as a static request model because it's somehow akin to, in fading, people look at ergodic fading and quasi-static or static fading. This is in a sense similar, right? You have this issue that the side information doesn't stay the same. Now the cool thing is actually that for both models you get the same answer. Well, with a little asterisk, of course. But so this is the answer that you would get. The optimal rate region, the optimal set of pairs, cache rate, update rate is simply given in this. Simply this way here with a single auxiliary random variable v, which really can be interpreted as the cache contents. The asterisk here, of course, is that RU, in the case of the static request model, is the average update rate, average overall over these n possible requests, right? Akin to quasi-static fading, you could look at outage and others, and that's done in the paper. I'm not going to talk about it here. This is very simple to prove, so I'm not going to tell you too much about it. First I have a quick historical remark about the static request model. That is actually just a shameless reinterpretation, or after fact turns out, of a very old paper by Gray and Weiner in 1974. The Gray-Weiner network, which looks like this, figure 2 from this paper, looks like this. Right, you have one encoder, this has 3 outputs, right? Why it has 3, I only have 2. I have 2 encoders, it has 3 encoders, and that's of course because it's divvied out. Decoder, we have 2 different decoders. One decoder wants file 1, other decoder wants file 2, right? But the cache contents is the middle link, so the common that will be given to both of the receivers. So that part somehow is that static request model, at least in the case of 2 files, if you wish, is a classical result that can be extended easily from there. For the proof, the coding theorem is very easy, right? For the cache encoder, all you'll do is you generate your codebook according to the auxiliary distribution, and then you do joint typicality encoding. I'll say a little bit more about it afterwards. Right, but all you do is you send the index of that code word, and then you bin the actual requested thing. Right? So this is the requested thing, as we said, is this function of the data and the request. So this is shown for the canonical information theory model, but it doesn't look very different for the other one. You bin with respect to the side information, which is the request sequence and, of course, the cache contents. And that's it. Now, the converse is maybe a little more interesting and will allow you, if you give this as an exercise to your students, to let them play with these information quantities. The key, and that's for you to decide whether you want to give this away, I think the key is, of course, always in these converses to identify the right thing as the auxiliary. Here it comes out to be the cache message, that's maybe not surprising, and all the functions until I-1, so the ith auxiliary. And then this is maybe a little more surprising, it's all of the side information except the ith sample. That's maybe what makes it a little more interesting. And then what you can rewrite here is, well, simply from Fano, you can say, of course, the cache rate is lower bounded by, well, just the huge information between the data and the cache message given whatever you want. And then this step here will be a little nicer. I'm not going to do it here, it's standard, right? It's for a homework problem. For the update rate, you have to do a similar, well, it's actually easier. For the update rate, you just split the y to the k in this particular way, and you can easily prove it. So, that gives me this little theorem, right? But it has an auxiliary. And the question is, can you say much about the auxiliary? The answer is no, right? In general, you cannot say much about the auxiliary. Does that come as a surprise? Of course, not to anybody who's working network information theory. In general, you cannot say much. We have these I should maybe point out we have this cardinality bound, but that's where it ends. You can maybe graph it real quick. One thing you can find is that the update rate, you start at the intercept here, is simply the entropy, conditional entropy of the request. Sorry, of the data, so the request data given the request. That's easy, I guess. But then maybe more explicitly, you can also say that the sum of the rates cannot be smaller than this conditional entropy, right? Because you have to send at least that, right? The receiver to begin with knows only y, it wants to learn f of x and y, so you have to send at least that, there's no way around it. For the cache rate, well, you can get a similar thing, right? So for the cache rate, you're looking just for the best p of v given x, the one that minimizes this cache rate expression, such that, well, allowing you to make the entropy of the request given the cache rate s and y equals to 0. So in here, we have this little thing. We know that on the blue line, by time sharing, we can get anything. We know we cannot get below the 45-degree line, and the question is this: where exactly does this optimal trade-off come lie? And to give you a further insight into this, I'm now going to restrict a little bit to illustrate the point, right? So for uniform requests, we can do a little more. Right? For uniform requests, we can zoom in. So this was my theorem from before. Now let's plug in uniform requests, and I should say x and y. So I'm also going to assume that the data and the requests are independent. Then you can play this little trick. So first of all, of course, the conditioning here, if x and y are independent, this conditioning, this move is done. Here I'm just going to rewrite this function now as x to the y as the request. I guess that y has some discrete cardinality here, and then I'm going to plug in the uniform request, and that's actually where I think there's a little more interesting thing going on. So I'm just undoing this this little conditional entropy now as 1 over n, so the probability that y is equal to any of its values, I'm assuming that y has n different values to the request, and then this is just the remaining entropy, so to speak, if you wish to think of it this way, of the nth file conditioned on v. Okay, and then to make further progress, I'm going to add and subtract this mutual information, x of the mutual relation between the data and the cache contents. You can see here I subtracted, I added it just here, h of x minus h of x given b. Why is that interesting is, of course, one, we realize that this is just a cache rate, again, right? And then this guy here is a total correlation. You can easily prove for yourself that this is non-negative, right? So this cannot be negative, and to make further progress or to understand it better, we're even going to restrict to capital N being 2, right? If N is equal to 2, then of course you can realize that this is simply a conditional mutual information, right? It's a sum of the marginal entropies minus the joint entropy. That's just a mutual information. So more explicitly written out in this way, and that's in a sense where Weiner's common information comes into play. You can ask yourself now, well, what happens to this guy as you make RC larger and larger? And at some point, you want to minimize, at some point you can make it exactly 0, right? At some point you can find a V such that x1 and x2 are conditionally independent given that V, right? And you cannot do any better because you already know it's an information, it cannot be negative. So that's the best case. So when does that happen? Maybe one more step, because it cannot be negative, you also get a nice additional lower bound which says that the update rate cannot be smaller than half times h of x minus r. Right? Okay, this term. So this is another lower bound. This is one here. And then, of course, the question is when can you start to make it 0? Well, that's just whenever you can make this information 0. So this critical rate after which it is 0 is simply Weiner's common information. Right? So that's the point at which you find a V such that this information here, the conditional information is here. Okay? So the theorem somehow says for this special case that we know the optimal performance once you hit Weiner's common information. If you have at least that amount of cache or more, we know the optimal performance. Below that, actually, we don't. Even for this simple case, we don't. So that's an open problem, right? So unfortunately, I know it's quite difficult for us. I don't want to say too much, I think, because I have some other things to cover, but you can, I'll pause the slide up. You can do that for the non-symmetric binary source. You can find Weiner's common information explicitly. Here, the auxiliary will just be, if they're equal, it will be a noisy version of that value. If they're not equal, it will be W. It will be something that's completely independent of everything. You'll get a certain trade-off. We don't know if it's numerically, I should say. Numerically, we tried everything. Cannot be it, but cannot prove it. So there's a coding information which I'm going to skip today. I would like to move on to the lossy case. I should also say it's a workshop, so you can interrupt me if I guess I don't have a board, but I'm still happy to answer questions. So for the lossy case, I want to just make a few comments, right? Right, so let's go back to this model. Let me pick actually for ease of envisioning things here this quasi-static. So there's really n files, right? You pick one of the n files, you recover one of these files. Y tells you which one you recover. And now the catch is that you don't recover it exactly. You will recover it subject to some loss. And what I'm going to restrict to for this talk here is just the mean squared error loss and the case of a Gaussian files, jointly Gaussian files. So here the idea is that these files here are now long strings, IID, and in every symbol they are jointly Gaussian with a certain covariance matrix, sigma x. Right? And the question is, what can you do now? Well, we can go back to our theorem. This is a theorem we had at the beginning, and we can make that lossy. So in the first place, that's not a very difficult thing to do, right? You can just bring in an x hat, right? Instead of asking for the update rate to be the conditional entropy of what you want, so as to perfectly recover it, you now just say, well, it's some information between this and a new auxiliary x hat. And that new auxiliary x hat should be enough to allow you to recover your files within the desired distortion level, so generally it's like that. Now, of course, it makes it even harder, right? You have two auxiliaries, V and X hat, you have to find them in the best possible way. That seems quite a little bit hopeless, right? So let's open it up to gain more insight. Again, I'm pulling out explicitly the conditioning on the Y, right? So this was, I'm just rewriting it and pulling out explicitly conditioning on the Y. And now you can see that what you have are these informations between the YS file, right? And the reconstruction of the YS file. And what I'll do now is I plug in Gaussians, okay? Plug in Gaussian sources. And not only that, as you probably guessed, those of you working in information theory, it's actually for this problem not possible to prove in general that Gaussian auxiliaries are optimal. At the same time, you'll understand that if you don't pick Gaussian auxiliaries, there's very little hope that you'll make any progress here. So let's plug in Gaussian auxiliaries, see what we get, and we'll get a partial optimality which is akin to what I just showed you in the loss test. So let's do that for a Gaussian case. We get, of course, all these informations turned into logs of something. Right? Some of them you can see here. So what we use actually is a parameterization where D1 is the distortion at which you could recover file 1 just after a caching. So if I don't give you anything more, I just give you a cache. Well, because everything's jointly Gaussian now, that will allow you very easily to track the kind of distortion you'll get, the hypothetical distortion you'll get on file 1, right? So that's D1, and then the update rate in the case of P now is the probability that you will pick file number 1, and then 1 minus is the probability that you pick file number 2. So this is the update rate that you'll need in the case that you'll pick file number 1. So the way we parameterize the auxiliary here is, in that case, through, if you wish, the conditional needs, right? The conditional mean vector, or then the covariance matrix of that vector, which is this name is fat P, whose diagonal entries are precisely these distortions that you could get, these hypothetical distortions that you could get after the caching, and the off diagonals you can optimize over them, right? So you get to optimize over the off diagonals. So the theorem now looks like this. You get to optimize over all covariance matrices D that have diagonal entries D1 and D2. This kind of an expression. Now it turns out, luckily, this first problem, if we ignore the second constraint temporarily, then we can just try the first thing, that's minimize this overall covariance matrices with diagonal entries D1 D2. And that problem has actually been solved. I found this, there are probably earlier references, I don't know, from 2005. There's an explicit solution here, which is a little painful to deal with. We can visualize this in the D1, D2 plane, and I think that's kind of the thing that I want to get across here for my talk. So we visualize this in the D1, D2 plane. There's these 3 regions, here they are. So So there's three very different, so this is D1, this is the hypothetical distortion of the first file, just based off of the cache, right? This is D2, and then what you can see here is there are these three regions. These three regions is a very trivial one where you end up coding only one file because they're sufficiently correlated and the distortion constraint is so large on the other file that it's just estimated. Right? And then D1 is also very special because there the optimal D matrix is actually diagonal. So you will have on the diagonal exactly the entries D1, D2, and then off diagonal is 0. The interesting reason perhaps is D2. Here, the optimal Gaussian auxiliary is a linear combination, a specific, carefully chosen linear combination of the two sources, depending on where you are. Right? So if we overlay now here the equipotential lines, if you wish, of this rate, right? So that's a cache rate, if you wish, that's a cache rate as a function of these D1 and D2 distortions. What you can see is, so the cache rate, of course, if D1 and D2 are large, then the cache rate is small, right? It means that based off of the cache, you have a huge distortion. So the cache rate small is over here in this upper corner, and then the cache rate goes up as we get to the 0, 0 point, and it shoots up to infinity, right? Because it's Gaussian sources, you cannot have a distortion that is exactly equal to 0. Now, let's bring in the constraint again, right? So the second, so far we've only tackled this first guy. What about the second guy? Well, we can bring it in as a constraint, right? We can fix, if you wish, the update rate, and then minimize this guy subject to a fixed update rate. So that would look like this, right? So I've rewritten this guy here, is P over 2 times log this. I've written this in this particular way, getting rid of the log, so it's a constraint on the product of these diagonal entries of the constraint optimization problem of this, this maximization of log det d. Right? So we want to maximize the determinant of a matrix subject to a constraint on the product of its diagonal entries. That is the Hadamard inequality, which you have probably seen. You can, at best, the best case is if you can pick it to be a diagonal matrix. I don't want to go through there entirely, I just want to show you in pictures what it does. Right? So this red dashed line, that is exactly the constraint that I have. That is the location of those D1, D2 pairs that give you a certain value, a fixed update rate. Okay? Right, and then all you have to do is, along this dashed red line, you have to find the one, so compared to the equipotential line, you have to find the minimum cache rate, right? So it'll give you a point here, somewhere there, right? Graphically judging, because this is the lowest equipotential line. Remember, the cache rate gets larger and larger as you go in this direction. Now, if you vary, right, hypothetically, if you vary the update rate, well then this red dashed line will move up or down, right, in this picture, so it will go into one of the two corners, and you'll get these nice little paths. So as you vary the update rate from 0 to 10, you'll get these pictures here that look like this. You'll traverse this plane in this particular way, okay? And this is for a file preference probability of 49, so almost equiprobable. Then if you make it more and more extreme, that's what it looks like. Right? So you'll get these more and more extreme pictures where, because the probability now is so large of picking file 2, you'll go more and more along this specific thing here. Okay? So this gives you a very ugly theorem, right? Because actually characterizing that intersection point, we didn't find a nice expression. You can write it in this particular way, parametrically, but no better than that. What I want to end on, actually, this little discussion of the lossy case is this, right? So this was for 49% for file 1, 51% for file 2. Obviously, if you reverse the roles, you just get the opposite curve, right? So if it's 51% for file 2 and 49% for file 1, you get this thing, right? Now, what do you get if it's 50%, 50-50, right? And what you get is, you get this, and it's actually not unique. Inside the quarter circle, so it's not quite a quarter circle, but this quarter circle-like structure, it's not unique because it's just a diagonal matrix with certain entries. But for this particular case, when it's equiprobable, we know a much better, a much more explicit answer. So first of all, the entry point. So this point, where is my? Oh, good. So this entry point here, that corresponds exactly to the case when the cache rate has attained this formula here, which is Weiner's common information. So it's again exactly the same picture. Once you hit 1 year's point inflation, you're at this point, and then from here inwards, not only is the optimal matrix that minimizes this thing diagonal, we can also prove, actually in this case, that Gaussian oscillators are optimal. And that again follows because you need a converse bound, much like the one that we have in the discrete and lossless case. I should say that this has also been considered in a worst case perspective in the nice work of Timo and Michel and others. That's a good lead over. So what I'll do now is I'll switch to multi-user caching. So let's now think about more than one user, and I'll start with just a small thing about this worst case. Right. What is this worst case? So far I've done everything nice and information sharing, but much of the work has taken this perspective, right, where you have well, maybe a picture like that, where you have two decoders, because if you do worst case, there's not much interesting that happens in a single user scenario, so you have to have at least 2 users. That's if you do worst case over files at least. And then, I guess, the result, well, the results are maybe, this is just, there's many beautiful works, which I'll mention again, but the closed result, as far as I know, are these, right? So if you have 2 users, I should say, like exactly like this picture, you have 2 users, and you have only 2 files in your whole universe, then it's fully solved. That was by Mara Nixon in 2014. A lot of the work out there looks at linear caching strategies. So what you cache is these modular sums that we've seen before. For that, there's a lot more available, beautiful questions about how large you have to pick the field size, like what people apply in network coding and so on. And perhaps more recently at this ISIT, there was some nice progress on the uncoded caching version. So that is where you only cache subfiles. You don't do any of these tricks. You don't do modular sums. Then the optimal is actually known, but of course this is actually known to be suboptimal. This assumption is known to be suboptimal in the case where the cache is small. So this is a very clumsy attempt at capturing a little bit of the scratching the surface. I'll show you these references later on. What I want to do again is follow up with what I did, and that's getting back to this challenge. You remember the challenge, right? The challenge was like this. We have files that have some similarity, right? Which is in a sense all that I've talked about in the first part was about file similarity in the end, right? It was how you model information is going to be file similar. So now we have file similarity, this cheap old model again, and multiple users. What can you do? I claimed we should cache A1, A2 at both users, and I'm sure, so who managed to do better? So what we did here is, the way we kind of extended this is into something that we ended up calling multi-library coded caching. It's a slightly more general thing, so I'm asking you to take one step back. We have now L libraries, right, of files. And here's the catch. It's different from the classical caching perspective because every user has to select exactly one file from each of the libraries. You can see how my challenge is an instance of this with L equals to 2 libraries, right? One of these libraries just contains A. The other library contains the 2 files, B and C. So this model, my instance is the challenge that I posed to you. Now, one tempting strategy that you could envision is simply to slice up your cache, right? Take your whole cache, slice it up into L pieces, and then assign one of these pieces to each of the libraries, or databases, right, if you prefer. Right, you could do that. The remaining question is, how should you pick the optimal slices? Right, how much to give to each of the libraries? Okay? Maybe 0 to some, right? In general, you do L slices, but you may pick 0. Now, that can be solved. That problem can be solved, and here's a solution. And I'm going to explain for this case where the optimal cache rate, update rate, that's only in my second picture, trade-off is piecewise linear. That's not really instrumental, but it just makes it easier to explain. So here are these optimal separate cache update rates trade-offs for library 1 and library 2, right? Hypothetically, suppose these are the optimal cache update rate trade-offs. Now, how do you split between these two? Well, in turns out the optimal thing that you should do is, as you get an epsilon of cache, let's start at 0 cache. Now I give you a little bit of cache. What you should look is which of these guys has the steepest slope. Right? Very intuitive. The guy that kind of gives you the biggest bang for the buck. You give that epsilon to the guy who has the steepest slope. And then you continue like that, right? Of course, anybody who is in the cache, that slope, that piece of the slope you remove, the epsilon, you give always the steepest slope in a greedy fashion. So what you can see here, what we do, right, is, in this little example, you will give it to library 2 until your cache exceeds this point, right? So that's this first chunk here corresponds to the steepest slope here. And then, at that point, this guy is actually steeper than that one. So you'll give to this guy a little bit of cache and so on. Okay, so this is how the optimal cache trade-off is. I'm not going to show you the math of it because it's easier. So let's throw it at our problem. We have L equal to 2 libraries. One library here on the left has only a single file, right? That's easy. The cache update rate trade-off for a single file is just this thing linking 1 and 1, right? You cannot do any better, okay? Just a single file. The other library has 2 files, and luckily, my challenge also only had 2 users. That is the one and unique case which is fully solved, right? It's thanks to another reason. The cache rate trade-off looks like this, right? It goes down until a half, it's very steep, and then it flattens out, right? Now, if you use the optimal cache slicing that we just had, you see what you have to do, right? It's actually kind of counterintuitive. But I think on second thought, it's of course okay, right? You can see that the steepest slope is clearly the library that has 2 files, right? So the first chunk of the cache clearly has to be given to the library that has 2 files. After that, it's actually a tie. This slope is exactly the same as this, so you can pick either one or the other, right? And so for my challenge, just to keep things a little powerful, I'm going to pick this. For the second half of my cache, I'm going to pick the other library just to give something to both, right? So here's an optimal strategy. It's not unique, as you know. Now, so what you cache is, instead you cache, again, like in the example that I showed you earlier on, you cache the module sum of the first half of the files at user 1, and you also cache A1, right? Half of the common part, if you wish. And then for user 2, again, you cache the second, the module sum of the second half of the B2 plus C2 and A1, right? Again, the same A1. And then, well, this is what we should do real quick. If user 1, for example, wants the first file, and user 2 wants the second file, then you update this. Well, that's like the example that I showed you earlier on, called B2C1, right, where these act as keys to unlock the contents, so to speak. And then, of course, I have to send A2. Okay, so what is the analysis here? We still cache, I kept the cache size fixed, right, just for this challenge. We can still cache a half a file per user. You can see these 2 elements together constitute half of the file, right? So we still cache half of the file as before. And we need an update rate of how much? Well, 3/4 of the file, right? So these are actually quarters of the original file, so 1 to 3/4. Remember, before we needed 1 file total. This can be shown in this special case. I should warn you a little bit. In this special case, I can actually prove optimality. Now, I'm happy to do that in the break. Afterwards, I have a little slide here, but let me skip it. We can prove a more general theorem, of which, unfortunately, my challenge is not a special case, but it's still a surprising theorem. So what we can show is that for an arbitrary number of users and an arbitrary number of libraries, if a very bizarre constraint in the process, if all libraries have the same number of files, then the optimized cache memory sharing is optimal. Not very hard to prove, actually, but maybe a little less than obvious, because nobody knows the individual optimal trade-offs, right? So it's like a little meta theorem. It says that this is optimal, but we don't exactly know how to share it because, except for the 2-user, 2-file case, we don't have it currently, the optimal trade-offs. Good. So this is all that I'm going to say about the worst case model. I'm happy to talk a little later more about it individually if you want. But what I want to say now is how would you extend the canonical information theoretic model to 2 users? Right? We've seen, in a sense, how it was done in much of the work spurred by reason. But again, if you came out of your undergraduate information theory class, I claim this is what you would do, or graduate, let's say math, so this is what you would draw, right? You would say, well, if I have 2 users, the general picture is this. There are 6 messages, namely, every one of my encoders has a message for every subset of the decoders, right? So there's a message for example, a cache message for decoder 1, there's a cache message for decoder 2, and then there's a common cache message that goes to both, right? So that's what you would write. Otherwise, of course, we leave everything the same. The setup, the logic, and so on, the error probability is the same. Now, perhaps not surprisingly, well, and the other thing I should say, there's another choice here that I'm making exactly as in essentially all of the caching work that is published, and that is, how should this site information be picked? Right? In principle, this should be Y1 and this should be Y2. Right? And then this is the combo of Y1 and Y2. However, it's generally assumed that you have this global knowledge because it makes it actually quite hard if decoder 1 does not know what decoder 2 requested. In some cases, you can argue that you could just send that information, right? But well, that will possibly be. So, well, then this will be a formal statement. Not surprisingly, perhaps, to most of you, here R star is unknown. I should say it's also, we don't know how to express it, not even in terms of unknown auxiliaries. We don't know how to do it. So what we took, the route that we took here, which I think is somewhat nice if you've studied network information theory, is this configurations business, like we call it like that. So this just means we set certain of these rates to 0, right? And then we study special cases. For example, configuration 1 here, the only rate I've set to 0 is the common update. There's no common update, right? Configuration 2, configuration 3 is a little different. So configuration 3, for example, does not have anything private for decoder 1, right? And then you can recognize down here configuration 5, that is the one that most people have been studying, where there is private cache stuff for everybody, and then there's one single common update. Now the funny thing with this little picture, or I guess the interesting thing is that these first 3, we can solve them completely, not just in auxiliaries, but well, these ones we know, for these ones we don't know, right? So that's kind of the idea. Maybe I can show you, here's maybe the thing that connects back to the classical information theory, right? So configurations 1 and 2 are actually linked with Redliner. Configuration 3 is a successive refinement kind of a thing. So the double line means these we can solve, and then configuration 4, well, configuration 5 maybe is the most interesting one. It has a flavor of this Caspi-Hegard-Berger problem, if you see that. So let me show you just a glimpse of these solutions. Maybe there's one kind of funny little meta theorem emerging, which I don't really have a proof for, but would be interesting. So configuration 1 was this guy, right? So the only thing missing is the common link here, and so the theorem looks like this, right? So let me first give you the theorem. The theorem looks like this. It has, of course, lots of auxiliaries now. It has a common cache, and then it has 2 private caches. Otherwise, it is as you would expect, in the sense that the private caches, for example, are conditionally independent, given the common cache and the data and so on. So it has a bunch of nice features. You can also see, of course, here in the end, you just top it off. So that's the easy part. Why, in a sense, why can you prove it here? It's really because it's just a Gray-Weiner system. Well, again, more obviously, a Gray-Weiner system with side information on the caching side. So the blue side is just a Gray-Weiner system, and then all you have to do is, Gray-Weiner, I should say, the Gray-Weiner logic is you first do the common description and then you do private descriptions. And that, in a sense, is what permits you to prove the optimality here. And what we do here is just sequentially tag on the red private descriptions. You do them last. Right? And I guess you can also explain see it like that. VC, the common cache is just a Weiner-Zip problem with light side information, and then the next of the private caches is another Weiner-Zip problem, and then in the end you just have selective wolf coding with different side information, and that's what allows you to do it. And here is kind of this meta theorem emerging. We do first the common cache, then the private cache, and then the private update. So this is not a foolproof, or a foolproof without copy paper, it's just an intuition of why it works here. Why does the proof work? It's because it has this nice layered structure. I'm not going to talk about configuration 2, it's very similar. Configuration 3 is this one. You can see that it has a very distinctive successive refinement flavor in that decoder 2 is just better than decoder 1. Right? Anything decoder 1 can do, decoder 2 can also do, because it doesn't get anything private. Right? And so again, what you can do now is you'll first, so this is kind of the theorem, right? It has this distinctive successive refinement flavor. You can see exactly here, like for example, down here it says that decoder 2 will actually cover both of the data functions. Well, actually, let me not say too much about this. But the important thing is again that you first do a common description, the blue common description, then you do the red common description, then you do the blue private, and then you do the red private. If you do it this way, you get a converse. Okay, so these are again this simple step it off and y cross, and so this is this order that I said. Now, surprisingly, I guess, of course, this is this meta theorem. What we can say is that if you always cache first and then update, and you always do the common contents before the private, then we can prove optimality. Right? That's not a precise theorem, so it's not a theorem, right? It's just an observation. I believe it's probably true in general, because that's just how these proofs work, right? Because then you can use these terms. And the question is, can you always do that, right? Can you always stick to these two orders? So cache before update, common before private. And you can easily convince yourself no. If the answer is no, and that one's a counterexample, right? Why is that? Because, look at it, right? If you want to do cache before update, then you will have to do private before common, right? So you violate it, and vice versa, right? You want to do private before common before private, then you have to do update before cache. And so here we cannot do it. We cannot prove optimality. We can still show an achievability, and for those of you taking network information theory classes, another nice thing shows up here. I guess the reason, in a sense, why it doesn't work is because at the second stage you get what's called a Gastpar problem, where site information is different at the two decoders, right? May or may not be present, and so it's not known how to pick this message in an optimal way. From an achievability strategy, so the best achievability strategy that we could come up with has an interesting feature, and I would just like to point this out. So this is not surprising to those of you, of course, who have done this. It's a broadcast problem. We have this term here coming in. Right? So what you will want to do in general is now you will not want the cache, the private caches to be conditionally independent. You want to use markdown coding and make them dependent according to some P of V1, V2 given X. Why? Right? You can see that's only bad for the caching side. Right? It's only going to hurt in the caching side. But it will be good in general in the update, because it will lower the update rate if the cache contents is correlated. So this is a kind of an additional feature creeping in here. Good. So the last couple of minutes, I would like to use to extend this to many users, right? That only gets much worse. So I don't want to say too much about this. I'm also going to restrict here to this topology, just because I know that it's of most interest to everybody, because that's somehow what kicked off this caching thing, right? The topology where you have private caches only, and you have a common update only. Okay? Now for this, extending my theorem, so that's kind of going back to the beginning of the talk, the first theorem that we proved together that I suggested you put on the exam is that exactly this shape, right? The cache shape is larger than the initial request between X and V, and I guess here I'm assuming that the request is independent of the data, so otherwise it would be conditional Y, and then the update rate is this thing, and so you can just extend this in a cut set kind of a sense, right? So here, all we do is we merge, if you wish, a few of the decoders. The only reason why I wanted to state a little bit for this is because in the achievability, right, what to do now, right, that's going to be really accurate. So first of all, like we saw before, in general, we should do markdown coding. Here we don't do it, because we don't know how to tackle that yet. So what we picked here, you can see the joint distribution here, implies that we pick the cache is conditionally independent. And then that's really easy, right? So the cache is simply independent, potentially independent, so caching as before. And well, there's actually a time series. So I should say, time sharing here also is important, so we allow, of course, time sharing over multiple distributions, but that will play a key role, which I'm not sure I have time to explain. But the important, the only thing that I would emphasize is this update, right? That looks horrible. So what do we do in the update there? How do you do that? And you can see here, what do we do? The number of auxiliaries explodes. We pick one auxiliary for every subset of the decoders. Right? Of all sizes. So for every individual decoder, for every pair of decoders, for every triple of decoders, and so on, we have to pick a separate auxiliary because that helps. Right? And of course, in the end, well, this is this condition now. So then you get these information. I'll show you where I come from. And of course, you have to pick this distribution such that these conditional entropies, that's the delivery conditions, right? That is, the data has to be recoverable at receiver number L for all of them. So how do we do this? In the update encoder, right? So that's it. So rate splitting, we give one message for every subset, as I just said. Then you just pick these distributions, conditionally independent, right? That's important because otherwise you have to again do Markov. So we pick these all independent of each other. We do these notebooks, and then we do joint typicality encoding. So the encoding has to be already a joint typicality for every one of these subsets separately. That's another important. For every message separately, we pick the message index such that we have the right joint statistics between the code word U and the X and the Y. Right? That works, and that's a classical condition here that works if you have sufficiently many choices. Right? You have to find one that is jointly typical. That works if you have enough choices, so that means it's a lower bound of these rates. You send all of these messages through the common link, all of them, right? And then, I guess the count is only those nodes that are part of a certain subset. So every node fishes out those messages that are for her. Right? So it's not all of the messages are for her, only a subset. And then the decoding will be, again, a joint typicality decoding where you pick the message such that, again, to make this joint typical, and that's an easy application, of course, again, of what we learned in the basic information theory. That's all work if the rate of this M index of this R hat is not too large. You combine these two, and you get an expression that looks like this. Right? So this will be the condition, the rate, this rate RS has to be at least this large for every S, but then you still have to maximize it over all receivers, and then sum it over all possible subsets. Right? Seems hopeless. Okay, seems hopeless. How good is this achievability? Well, we did it for one special case, which we call the file selection network, which I'm not going to explain in too much detail because I should stop, but we have these N files, you just pick, every user picks one of the N files, essentially. And for that, we can specialize our bounds in this way, so that the lower bound will turn out to be this, and through a judicious choice of these U random variables, which I'm not going to tell you here, but which you can find in the paper, you can actually, amazingly enough, figure out, oh, this points the wrong way around. So no, it's an achievability. So it's okay. You can find that this crazy information expression boils down into this much simpler expression. Not only this, you can also prove that the gap between these two is no larger than a factor of 4. Right? Now, if your information theory is going to tell me, come on, factor of 4. What is that? That's bad, right? So we want to have much better, but let me show you what's true in the caching world, right? In the caching world, one of these had factors of 12 and 75, so 4 is not so bad. So that's we're somewhat happy. We also have a better, well, I can just do this all together and conclude here. So there are at least 3 basic coding opportunities. It would be great to find another one. The statistics as a request, that's not anything. Then redundancy correlation in the data, right? That's a good one because you have the data, so you can measure that. The first one is hard, you have to make guesses about the users. The second is easy, it's right there, it's in your database. And then these multi-user synergies. We showed some kind of information theory perspective on this and a bunch of bounds. There are some full solutions, some partial solutions, open problems. I think one that I like a lot is beyond IID models. Something can be done, right? Information theory works beyond IID. There's a few hiccups here, so if you want to talk about it, I'll be happy. The third bullet is also very close to my heart. I haven't made much progress on this, so I have this challenge to you, right? I wish I could say more about this challenge now and say like, oh, and we can use the information theoretic model to completely, get a good answer for this. I don't have a good intuitive answer. Right? Like these crazy expressions, I don't know how do you combine file correlation and bulk using. Right? You saw in the challenge and it's somewhat counterintuitive at least. Request on loading code constructions, I skipped this little part, but you can say more about it. So the intelligent rules for what I presented here can be found in these 4 papers, but of course, more importantly, there's a lot of references. I'll post the slides, and I guess, since I couldn't go through all these references, and perhaps you understand why at this point, at least it would be nice to have a list. So I'll somehow post them, and then please let me know. I'm probably missing some. I'd like to make it as complete as possible. But with this, I'll end.
I think you have time for one question.
So, you assume that the statistics is known by ID everywhere, not only at the translator. Everywhere. How about universal algorithms, meaning that I'm not that it's not that you learn the statistics and then you read. For example, Mona Lisa, compression, Lemperzik, empirical, and you cannot beat it. And the messages are the paintings of the same painter. Still, we have universal Lemperzik, we have universal gray wine, we have universal register, we have universal channel code, we have almost every component you need. So, now go there.
Good. So the question for, if not everybody got it, is universal coding, right? How about universal codes for caching? Thank you for asking this question. I didn't put it here because I tortured myself for 3 years or so, and I have not come up with anything good. If you just do a kind of straight up levels, you'll run into these issues that you cannot actually decode it. It's someone that doesn't lend itself.
So that is just the extreme point of the entropy.
Right.
Like you don't. Here it works. Binary zip, you have universal. It's not that it's simple to implement. It's something else. But
exactly. So the question is, how do you do that with universal? And I think that somehow the bottleneck. Well, from one side, there's an easy answer, right, which is, something with, like you measure the statistics and you communicate the statistics separately, and then you amortize this all. But that, to me, honestly, doesn't actually appeal to me. So I was looking for something that's algorithmic like, and I never got that to work. So it's not until now. So I should return to it. But I'm happy if somebody is up for working on this. I would be very happy to share what I've tried so far.
Okay, let's keep the rest of the questions private. Let's thank the speaker again.